And now, two guys who once survived defusing a drama bomb, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. In this episode, author Christopher Hadnagy hacks our brains. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Whether you're already a crack shot or have never taken a bit of instruction in your life, we could all become better marksmen. Join the volunteers at Project Appleseed for a day or even a weekend of rifle instruction that is second to none. Find out where marksmanship meets history by connecting with the good folks at appleseedinfo.org or click on the 3 Strikes of the Match banner under the We Support heading in the right-hand column of In the Rabbit Hole. Remember, your rifle isn't going to shoot itself. So impress your friends, impress your neighbors the next time you're at the range. And don't miss out on the chance to shoot for free and earn your rifleman's patch today. Very exciting show for you today. We're going to delve into the thing that scares people the most, regardless of the disaster type. Other people. But this isn't a show about tactical situations or burglars or gangs. No, this is going to be a show about something much more sinister. Human hacking. What exactly is human hacking? Well, to answer that question and learn how to defend ourselves, we've got a special guest for you today. And, as it turns out, he wrote the book on human hacking. Literally. Christopher Hadnagy is the author of Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking. He's also the lead developer of social-engineer.org. So, Christopher, did I pronounce your last name correctly?
Hadnagy, but you're close enough.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So I guess let's start with the basics. What is social engineering?
I define social engineering as any act that influences a person to take an action that may or may not be in their best interests. I give it a real broad definition because I don't always think it's negative. Sometimes I think social engineering is used in a positive sense, like doctors, therapists, parents, kids, priests, all those types of people use aspects of social engineering to influence us to take actions that are good for us. But generally, when we talk about it in shows like this, we're talking about the negative parts of social engineering.
Yeah, I definitely think we could also get into the more positive aspects of it because that's something, you singled out specific professions, but I think all of us in our daily lives, to some extent, some better than others, use social engineering in some way or another, whether we're consciously doing it or not. It's how we interact as human beings even.
I agree, and I think the more we learn about how humans interact, the better we are at communicating with other people. Different aspects of professional social engineering is like learning nonverbal behavior or learning to discern someone's personality type pretty quickly. If you can do those things in normal everyday communications, it makes you a very good communicator. People enjoy speaking to you and listening to you. So it's skills that can be used both on the positive side too.
Yeah, definitely. One of the lessons I learned years ago while delving into this topic a little bit was to understand the concept of empathy and what it is, and found it so interesting how maybe it's technology, maybe it's just a matter of perspective, but how little people have a tendency to empathize with one another and really look at someone else's situation before trying to communicate with them. And I really do agree with you. It is such an important part, and the more we do learn, of course, the better communicators we do become, and perhaps the better life in general we have because of that, because so much of our life is interacting with one another.
I agree with that 100%. I really do.
On the spookier side of this is some like real-life James Bond, Michael Weston spy TV movie kind of stuff. And so you're like this jujitsu master of it. How did you get into it?
That's never heard myself described as that, but for me, it was just one of those things where growing up, I had a knack I always liked technology, first of all. It was something from a very little kid. I always had computers and always been around computers and messing with them. But I always had a knack of talking my way into situations or jobs or just scenarios that afterwards people would go, how the heck did you end up there? And I never really understood what it was. It was not something that I was able to define how I did it. It would be like somebody would challenge me to get into a place and I would just do it. And it wasn't until later on in life that I realized that what I was doing had some career application. So I tried my hand at, of course, the common things like sales. I was a negotiator for a while for a large company. And then as I kept playing with computers and security and technology, it became evident that there was something a lot more fun that I can do with these skills, and that ended up being social engineering. So it wasn't any epiphany like getting arrested or something like that and realizing that I was a criminal mastermind as much as just using my skills to understand how people communicate and are influenced.
That's really interesting. I know in the beginning of your book, you talked about one of the instances of how you talked your way into kind of a big private computer event that maybe you shouldn't or weren't necessarily invited to.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't invited to that. I was with a workmate of mine, and we were at the Javits Center in New York City at a big computer conference where all these vendors come out. One of the big vendor shows that they just promote their new tools and software and things like that. And I had a Linux Penguin, and I was standing at the line trying to talk to these two girls that were giving out tickets for people who had memberships or had signed up for this private party at FAO Schwartz right in the middle of Manhattan. Of course, I wasn't getting very far. I was trying to tell them that I was big wigs in one of these tech companies and they should let me in. And I was 20, 21. So obviously the pretext wasn't fitting the visual. And just then Linus walked up, and I had this Microsoft. I had a Linux Penguin. I had a Microsoft Cube, this little cube that had like the flag on it. And I said, "Hey, Linus, would you like to sign my Microsoft Cube?" And he thought that was really funny. He walked over and he gave me an autograph, and he goes, "I'll see you at the party." And it was just that interaction where the two girls saw him walk up. It seemed like we knew each other. I called him by his first name. He said, "I'll see you at the party." And I turned to them, and they just handed me 2 tickets. And and it was just those little things like that would happen that afterwards I would sit back and kind of analyze what it was about these interactions, and then realize that there was some heavy pieces of psychological influence in these interactions that made this kind of stuff work.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, getting basically having the inventor of Linux invite you into the party or pretext you into the party is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and it was, when you look at it from a psychological standpoint or human influence standpoint, it's almost like saying social proof. Here are 2 girls, they were trying to do their job. They didn't really, my name wasn't on the list, but here's someone who everybody at this party knows. I mean, like you said, the creator of Linux, the guy who his name was just, on the back of everyone's hand. And he walks up, we act like we know each other, and he says, "I'll see you in a little bit at the party." And it just, so I didn't need to now prove who I was. The social proof said, well, if this guy knows who he is, then he must be someone important. Give him tickets.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, at that time, I didn't realize that that's what was happening. It wasn't until later on when I can look back and reflect on those incidences and say, this is how that works. And then realize that this could be used in everyday communications. It's used by social engineers in the know. They know what they're doing, and they use these same principles in order to influence people.
Yeah, and I think there's another very interesting story at the very beginning of your book that really illustrates how someone can lose control of their personal information. I think it involved a woman having her purse stolen, and unfortunately it has a happy ending, but she even ended up willingly giving over her bank PIN number and everything else. Can you kind of go into that story for us a little bit?
Yeah, that's actually Paul Wilson. He wrote the foreword to my book. He's pretty famous over in the UK and even here for a show called The Real Hustle. He was on the BBC's Real Hustle for, I think, it was 14 or so seasons of that show. And he's a professional scam artist that does things for the good. So he produces scams, performs them, and then uses the after effects to educate the public on why they work. If I'm thinking about the right one you're telling me, I have to remember. But if we're thinking about the same story, this woman was just basically sitting in a cafe, minding her own business. And so he walks in with a briefcase. He looks like he's on a cell phone. He just acts like he's doing his own business, sits at the table behind her. And within a couple seconds, while another lead comes in, someone who's working with him, and distracts her, says, "Oh, can you take a picture of me and my girlfriend?" And she leans over to grab the camera, take the picture of the boyfriend and the girlfriend. And while she's snapping the picture, he then puts the purse in his briefcase. A moment later, she, of course, notices the purse is gone. She freaks out, and Paul, who has the purse in his bag, of course, offers to help. So now it's, hey, what happened? What's going on? Oh, my purse is gone. And this whole, of course, drama ensues to where he says, oh, man, I don't know what happened. I didn't see anybody. I'm sorry. I was on my cell phone. I wasn't paying attention. But what you need to do is right away call your bank and make sure they know that your credit cards, that's the first thing they're going to do. And the woman, frantic, says, my cell phone was in my purse. I can't make the call. And he says, what bank are you with? I'm with Chase. Okay, I'm with Chase too. I have the number. Hang on. He dials it on his cell phone, which is actually a guy sitting in a van outside. And he says, just use my phone here. Talk to them. Of course, they have a setup where the guy answers the phone. This is Chase Bank. How can I help you? And as they go through the process, now this guy on the phone, who she trusts to be Chase, she gives him the credit card number, her PIN number, her full name, verifies all her information. And he says, okay, no problem. Your account is shut off. Don't worry about it. We'll mail you out a new card. She rests easy with, of course, the fear that her purse is stolen, but her credit cards are safe. In the meantime, the guy who has the purse now has her credit card number, PIN numbers, name, date of birth, all that other vital information to complete identity theft. And really, this was done with just a couple people. Can you take my picture? And then someone offering help. And those kind of influential properties, again, psychologically, the person is distraught. And when someone comes to their rescue, they look at them as a savior, not as a potential threat.
You also mentioned stories about scams going on after the tsunami that hit Japan, and how I think it also spoke to how common that is when we see disasters that scams will, and not to scare people off from donating to reputable charities that they already know in those situations, but that people will take advantage of those situations.
Oh, unfortunately, especially in the recent events, when the tsunami hit Japan, there was some very malicious scams that were put out there. This one that was it was a multi-tiered scam. Within 8 hours of the tsunami, there was websites that were hitting pretty high in Google ranking, believe it or not, that were promising to help people find loved ones that may have been lost in the tsunami. They claimed to have, database structures with the government, with the military, and they were able to help search for your possibly dead loved ones. And they didn't want money. This was the great thing. They were doing this as a community service, and everything was secured, of course. And all they wanted from you was your full name, your date of birth to prove your age, your full address, your phone number, your email address, and then the same information for the person who you were searching for. And within 72 hours, 3 or 4 days, they would basically get back to you with this information, via phone or email. So while you're waiting, the next day, someone calls you from the Japanese Release Fund. And here's the relief fund. Here's the interesting part. Because you put your relationship in there, I'm looking for my mom. She was in Japan vacationing. I haven't been able to get a hold of her. Can you help me? So now this woman will call me on the phone the next day. This is Beth working from the Japanese Relief Fund. She's just asking for small donations over the phone to help with the relief work there. And she tells you a very believable sob story. Her mom, now the same relationship, so there's this emotional pull. Her mom was vacationing over in Japan, and she was actually out on a small boat when the tsunami hit and lost her life. She was so distraught, she didn't know what to do. And because of that, she joined this wonderful charity that's helping people find people who are not dead. And, because they're just got set up, they're looking for very small donations, 20, 30, 50 bucks at the most. And because they just got set up, they can't accept credit cards. They're just doing checks over the phone. The emotional pull is so strong that most people that had the loss and signed up on the website were willing to give 20 to 50 bucks in relief. So you give them your routing number and your account number. Now, with the routing number, there's free databases all over the web. You can find them very easily, that you type in anyone's routing number and it tells you the exact branch of the bank that that person works with.
Oh, wow.
So they take the donation, they thank you, they hang up, they go, and they quickly find out you work with Chase Bank, over here on 3rd Street in Manhattan. The next day you get a call from Chase Bank. Of course, now it's Larry. Larry works with Chase Bank, and he says, I just got this check that came in, this e-check from a charity. We're just verifying that you wanted this because there's a lot of scams going on. Can you verify that this check is something you wanted to go through? Of course it is. Well, to verify and to release it, I just need to get some details from you. This is on account number, and he repeats your account number, which of course now verifies that he is who he says he is, because how else would he have your account number? That doesn't make sense.
Of course.
So he says your account number. He says he's from Chase Bank. They usually even use spoofing, so it looks like they're calling from Chase Bank. And then he says, if you could just give me your Social Security number, I'll be able to verify your account and release these funds to the charity. And, he commends you for being so charitable and giving and all these other wonderful things. So in 3 days' time, they basically have your full name, your date of birth, your Social Security number, your address, your phone number, your email address, your checking account number, and your routing number. And there's really nothing else they need to complete identity theft. And they did it with 3 simple phone calls and pulling on your heartstrings because of a potential loss. So these things, they happened after 9/11. They happened after the earthquake in Haiti. They happened after the tsunami in Japan. And I think we're probably going to continue to see these type of attacks happen as time goes on.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of like the Nigerian, I'm a prince of something or other and I'm trying to escape from this country emails. You get them all the time and think, who falls for that? But somebody obviously is if they keep doing it, I suppose.
It's one of the most successful, believe it or not, because, nowadays we look at that and we say, well, who would fall for that? But when they first came out, there's this tendency towards greed and the what if. Mm-hmm. And when they first asked, they never asked for a lot of money. So near the end of the Nigerian scams, you saw people giving $1,000 to $5,000. But in the beginning, they were asking for $100, $300. And the way they would do it, which was also genius, is you would do Western Union. And to verify, they would ask you to fax the page you get back from Western Union. And what that does, of course, is when you do that, it gives your personal account number with Western Union that you had to set up to pull money from your bank account. And now they're able to set up Western Unions to pull money from your bank account. So they were setting up scams that would ask for very little sums of money with the promise of huge sums in return, but then using an insecure service that would allow them to steal from your accounts. It wasn't until later on that the Nigerian scams, they went as far as to have offices in New York City.
Oh, wow.
With people in Nigerian military uniforms that would be in the offices, and people would come in and they would look official. That you can rent a building for maybe an office for like 30 days for a low sum of money, be in there for a short period of time, conduct business, do these things for, 2 or 3 a day, collecting $1,000 per person, clear a couple $100,000 and be out of there and never show up again.
Wow.
These things were, got really malicious near the end. But the attack, like with the Japanese tsunami one, that was just a glorified version of the Nigerian scams.
Wow. And I think going back a little bit in some of those stories, it always surprises me how uneasy people are. Not that it's not in some ways easy to fake this, but how uneasy some people are to check other people out, and then they'll just blindly trust them. I had a federal agent years ago. I was working at a nightclub and I was checking IDs, and he just handed me this business card rather indignantly that I would ask him for his identification. And I just looked at him and said, nice business card, but I need a real ID. And while he was perturbed about it, my job was to ensure identification, not critique business cards. And I think, and it's funny, the little things you pick up from TV as a kid. I used to watch the Rockford Files as a little kid, and that was something he would always do. Is just he had the little printing press in his car and would print out business cards, and how people would accept that as identification. Yeah,
what I tell people is similar to what you said in the beginning, is not to make people not donate to the charities that they love, but to check. So, if you want to donate to a charity that's dear to your heart, don't accept a phone call from them. You call them. That way you know the number. You find the number online, or you find the number through your previous records, And when you call them, you know the number you're calling is the legit number. You've checked it, you've verified it. But, just accepting the phone call because they say they're from the Cancer Foundation or whatever it is, I get these calls all the time, even from my own bank, saying they're from the fraud unit of my bank. I just don't fall for it unless I call them.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right. People are a little uneasy about doing that because there's a human tendency to believe that everyone is as honest as me. People want to believe I'm not a liar. I'm not malicious. So why would someone lie to me? There's no reason why you would do that. So I want to believe that you're going to be as good and honest as I believe I am. And that tendency for us to believe that is what causes people to fall into these traps a lot.
That's really interesting. Now you also had, as far as like scams go, you had a story in the book about showing up to a place and getting in and having them let you in and even show you the way, I think, to go dumpster diving through their personnel files.
Yeah, that was an interesting. That was a pretty detailed attack too. I mean, we one of the vectors that this company wanted us to test. They had a policy that private information and confidential information, and especially technology, should not be disposed of improperly. But they had this inkling that their employees weren't following this because they had some incidents before. So as part of the pen test, they wanted to see if I can get into the dumpsters. Now, this company was pretty good about protecting their dumpsters. They weren't near the road. They were all on their own individual locked cage areas. So from the road, you couldn't see who it was. You couldn't see when, what was in the dumpsters. You didn't know. They weren't labeled like this one's paper, this one's tech. It was a pretty decent setup for their dumpster setup. So to get in, I called the AR accounts payable department and told them that I was going to be sending a quote in. We were a new waste management company, and I wanted to see if I could get her to give me the name, even though that we knew that was a policy, that they shouldn't give the name of their present vendor. But I had built a rapport with her. We talked, we joked, we laughed about kids, and we laughed about the area that she lived, that suppose I lived in also, different things that we liked in the area. After a few minutes of building rapport, before we hung up, I said to her I know I'm probably not supposed to ask this question, and I'm not asking for your pricing. But if you could just tell me who you presently deal with, that would just help me know who I'm competing against. There's just some people I can't compete against, and if it's one of them, I might not even submit a quote because, it's just going to be too difficult. And with that, she's like, I'm really not supposed to, but you're a nice guy, so here's the name of the company. I said, thank you. I'm not going to ask you anything about your pricing. As a matter of fact, don't even tell me. That's all the information I needed. I called my local, I have a shirt printing company, got a $5 shirt made up with the logo of the waste management company on it, a hat, and a clipboard. I called the security department. I told them, hey, this is Joe over from XYZ Waste. I'm sending Larry over tomorrow. He's going to be checking out a dumpster because Beth over in the office said that there's a damaged dumpster. Can you put his name down on the security checklist? They didn't even verify. They said, sure, no problem. What time will he be here? What time's good? They said 2. I said, okay, he'll be there between 1:30 and 2. I put the shirt on, got the clipboard, the hat. I walk up to the security desk, say, hey, this is Larry. My boss, Joe, called in, said that I was stopping in. They said, oh, yeah, we got your name right here on the list. I said, I'm supposed to check out a particular dumpster. It's the ones that contain all the paper. Sometimes they throw some technology in there. Do you know which one that is? They said, yeah, it's 19. You go over the building here, take a left, and you'll see the number on the pavement. I'm like, oh, great, thanks, no problem. So I take my car, drive right through, go down to 19, get the gate opened, and I just spend the next hour or so going through the dumpster, unloading bags of unshredded. I found some USB keys in there. Found some other technology that should have not been disposed of that way. Just put it in my trunk, pulled back out, told the guy, nope, all the dumpsters look good. Don't worry about it. The guy will be here for a pickup tomorrow. Have a nice day. And left with a trunk full of goodies that I should never been allowed to get into.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is amazing. I have a story of my own, and I guess I grew up a little bit more suspicious than everybody else. I grew up around a lot of magicians and mentalists. So I had some background in it a little bit, but it was funny. One day we had this very nice elderly salesman come in that wanted us to move to his merchant services company. And I was like, yeah, that's great. Real sweet old man and everything. Hey, leave your information with me. And And he's like, well, he did the salesman thing. Well, can I get you to sign up today? And I was like, well, I'm gonna look over this a little bit and think about it, and I'll get back to you. And I'd already made up my mind. I was interested in his company, but I wanted to send him on his way so I could actually call. And everybody thought I was nuts for doing that, but I was like, it really doesn't cost that much money or time to go down, like you were saying a second ago, and have a nice shirt made and have some nice marketing materials printed up. And then we would have turned over all of our banking account information and potentially access to all of our customers' credit card numbers and everything else. So,
I'm 100% with you.
Yeah. But people they don't want to check. And it really surprises me.
I understand it when I talk to large corporations, especially this past year. With the economy, they would, you see these companies that will lay off hundreds or maybe thousands of people. And you have these poor departments that maybe have 1/3 or more less of the people than they had previously. And they're still doing the same amount of work or more with less people. And, they have routinely when I do security awareness for companies, I'll ask, how many people here get 50 emails a day? And how many get 70? How many get 100? And I can't believe the number of increase of how many will get 100, 125 plus emails a day. And then on top of that, they have meetings, they have phone calls, they have many other things that go on in their daily life. So here you are, you're presented with a task. Your task is to pick let's use your scenario, pick a new merchant services company, and here comes a guy that you trust. It sounds good. His rates are good. It sounds perfect. To take the extra time to let him leave, to call the company back and make sure you got the real deal is not something that most are willing to do when they're dealing with 100 plus emails a day, plus 10 conference calls. And I'm not saying it's a good excuse because it's not. It's what the hackers feed on. It's what social engineers feed on. They know that people are that busy and they'll make mistakes because of that. But the end result is, we have these situations because people are too busy and they're not given the freedom to do critical thinking exercises. So it creates an environment where insecurity is more prevalent than secure thinking.
Yeah, and I think as far as the overall concept of what this show is about, that definitely speaks to being mindful, especially in situations where you're terribly busy or when there's a disastrous situation, to be that much more vigilant and paying attention to what's going on around you and not become a victim of something that would be so simple as using pretexting and looking like the right guy in the right place at the right time that can be trustworthy.
Yeah, and and it's don't get me on a soapbox because it's easy, but I was reading the paper and I saw like down in Texas, the state of Texas is trying to ban critical thinking exercises in schools.
Yeah, trust me, I'll get on that soapbox with you, but please go ahead.
It kills me. It kills me. I look at this thing and I'm like, critical thinking is the only thing that a lot of times can help someone remain secure in these situations. Social engineering, there is no software, there is no patch, there is no one thing I can tell you that will make everybody secure from social engineering. It is simply critical thinking. You have to be able to think through every situation and say, what is the risk of me doing X, Y, Z that this person is asking me to do? And is there another option that can make it less insecure? And if we don't teach our kids critical thinking skills, they're going to exit school and they're only going to know how to push the button and say yes or no, and that's it. And basically, we're creating the next generation of non-thinkers that are not going to be able to deal with the world's problems. Yeah, I understand why the state of Texas wants to do it. I know they have their own political agendas and things like that. But it just seems to me to be a real ridiculous method of approaching the problem, is to ban critical thinking skills for our children.
Yeah, to me, it's personally, if my kids that I don't have yet, but one day when I do, if that's all they were taught, at least they would then have the skills to think through and teach themselves almost anything else. I mean,
basically,
yeah.
It's
so
the hacker mentality. You see, you go to conferences like DEF CON or Black Hat, and you see these, or even the smaller ones, like DerbyCon or other ones, and you see these groups of hacker type people, and they're able to teach themselves unbelievable skills because their mentality is, well, if I don't understand it, I'm going to take it apart until I do understand it. And that mentality, it enhances someone's life. It enables them to learn new skills, to take on new challenges that they may never have been able to learn or take on before. It's just one of those things where If we take that away from our kids, we create a generation of yes men. We create a generation of guys who will be great as factory workers, but they're never going to excel. And I don't mean that to cut down factory workers. I'm not saying that, but they won't. There will be nobody that will want to reach out for more challenging roles because they won't understand the value of critical thinking.
That leads us into an interesting place. And you mentioned in the book, I think if I'm doing the quote justice here, often the human elements of a system are the easiest. And so when people imagine hackers, social skills in general aren't usually the first thing that comes to people's mind. But in this case, that's not the case.
Yeah, it's too often in Hollywood when you view hackers. It's movies like Swordfish or, things like that where someone in 60 seconds gets into some uber amazing database that, it would take literally months to get through, if even that. And hacking is not that way. Hacking is not the way it is in Hollywood. Most of hacking is quite boring. You're gathering information for weeks or more. You're trying to find the one vector in, and then you're bashing your head against the keyboard for 20, 30, 50, 100 hours until you find the one hole and then get in, and it's not as sexy as it looks. The end is glorious, but, the whole part getting there is not. Hackers have figured that out. And they said, and software vendors have figured that out. And software vendors are making their software harder. So the hacker's saying, you know what? Instead of bashing my head against the keyboard 100 hours in a row, I can make 2 or 3 phone calls and get someone to give me the information. You think about the WHMCS attack. That's a software company that makes online invoice billing and accounting software. And they were hacked, and 1 gig, I think it was 1 gig or 100 gigs of credit card data was downloaded from their servers. And the hack was literally this simple. They found out the database administrator's name from their website. They basically built a profile on this guy by going to every social media site he uses. They then called the database password recovery center, asked for a password recovery because they forgot, saying that they were Paul. When they asked him, the fake Paul, his security question, which of course was one of the questions he blogged about on one of his multiple multimedia and social media sites.
Oh, wow.
They then had the answer. They gave them the answer. The password was reset. They logged in, downloaded the gigs of credit card numbers, then formatted the servers for fun. It's not a sexy hack where they were sitting there bashing away at the software and they pressed a couple keys and the server melted like butter. It was literally a 1 phone call, and they were able to get this information. The same thing we saw with HB Gary's, the same thing we saw down the road with all the other attacks that we saw with Anonymous and Ugnaughts and these other groups over the last year. It usually starts with something very simple like a phone call or an email.
In a way, I think that may actually be more sexy, not as Hollywood dramatic, but more elegant, I think, in a way.
Yeah, I mean, for people like you and I, probably we see that. For me, I look at that and I go, the thing that bothers me about it is that when it's done, the press doesn't focus on that because it's almost too simplistic. So they refuse to focus on things like that. You won't see the articles written about that kind of it. Now we're seeing more and more of them, articles written and reporters willing to report on that. But before it was always, let's look at where the database weakness was. Like with Sony, they focused on the SQL injection, not the phone calls that Anonymous made to Sony to get the SQL statements, but they focused on the actual SQL injection. With these kinds of things that will always be the focus of, the sexiest part will always be the focus of the reporters and of the media. Mm-hmm. And that keeps people who aren't in the know, not in the know. So in essence, when they go to educate their employees, their customers, their companies, they say, we need to make sure our SQL databases are secure. And that's true, and that's good. But you also need to make sure your people are secure so they're not giving out the SQL statements that will cause the injection.
Yeah, so true. And you brought up a really good point about social media. And I look at social media regularly, and as somebody that blogs and podcasts, and also you're somebody that blogs and podcasts, using social media is a marketing tool that we kind of get sucked into. And I have my own personal reasons for I just can't stand social media. But I look at how much information people spill out about themselves onto, we'll say, Facebook or Twitter, and it just blows my mind.
Yeah, these things, I'm not a huge proponent or fan of social media, but like you, I use it because it's the way that I can communicate with thousands of people quickly. But, I have personal rules. Like, I don't ever blog or write about my family, about my hobbies, about where I live, about what I ate for lunch, travel plans. I don't do those kinds of things because that's what creates insecurity. If somebody knows, where I'm going to be going for the next month or two, somebody knows where I live, they know my family's names, they know all this kind of information about me, it's easier to attack me. I remember when I was a kid, if I read my sister's diary, I'd get the snot beat out of me by my parents and my sister. Nowadays, they put the diary online and they encourage you to read it. And it's 10 times worse than it was when we were kids. So the mentality has changed. People blog about everything. In addition to that, the problem comes in is that most security-related questions for authentication of accounts is weak. And it's silly and stupid questions like, what's the name of your pet? Or what's the name of your first car? These are things that people will often write about. These are things that people will have blogged about at some point in the past. And a dedicated hacker can build a profile on a person to have that information handy. So security-related questions, authentication questions, should be things that people don't often blog about. And then that makes it a lot more secure, so because, it's to say we need to change the way people use social media, it's never going to happen.
Right.
So we need to change the way that we use security involving social media so that way it's more secure.
That's really interesting. And you brought up something, I think it was in the book early on, that talked about a lot of smartphones now that have GPS chips in them are tagging photos with that information. And then, of course, everybody's posting that all over the internet.
Yeah, that is another unfortunate thing. I wrote about that a lot about a year ago, and it never got picked up by media. And I actually asked one reporter because the thing that was scaring me, you said you didn't have kids yet, but, like having kids myself, I start to wonder, I don't know what happened to kids where this became kind of cool, but these teenage girls go to school and their boyfriend somehow convinced them to take a picture of their chest. Mm-hmm. And they do that with their iPhone. And then they send it to their boyfriend, and then a month later, the standard typical breakup, and the boy says, I hate you, you're a hoe, I'm gonna blog this everywhere," and he posts a picture out there. Now these pictures are all over the web, and they're embedded with GPS data. Generally, she took the picture at her house, somewhere in her bathroom, her bedroom, and when you take these GPS coordinates, you could basically find out the location of her home. So I remember asking a reporter, why? Why can't we write about this? Why won't people write about this? Because nothing happened. No one's been abducted. No one's been molested. No one's been hurt because of this. So it's not news. News will occur after. So I take every opportunity I can to write about it and talk about it and tell. When I give speeches on completely alternative topics, at the end, I usually for 5 minutes just say, anyone here a parent? Anyone here have teenage daughters? Then here, you need to know this. And most people are unaware of it. The whole gasp goes on, and then they go home and make those changes because it's a simple change. When you're taking pictures, your GPS needs to be turned off, or in iPhones, there's features so you can tell it to not embed that GPS data. But it's a standard practice, and you can see it because Flickr, this is how Flickr works, right? You go to the Flickr front page, and it has the map of where the billions of pictures have been taken and submitted today, and that's because those pictures that are taken have GPS data embedded in it.
Yeah, when I read that, it blew my mind. And I actually have to tell myself, I didn't even know that until I read it. And a lot of the pictures I've taken of different things to post, even on the Facebook page for this show, were taken with my iPhone. And now I have to go back and delete them all out, and have retaken a lot of those pictures with my Canon that I know has no GPS in it. But it really was shocking. And I mean, it's certainly much more sinister situation with a teenage girl or something like that, whereas opposed to somebody coming and messing with one of my chickens or taking a bell pepper or something. But
I tell people, too, think about this from a corporate environment. So you got Mr. Big CEO, part of a company that very well may be a target for corporate espionage or a nation state, depending on what they do and what they produce. And there's the wife taking pictures of the kids in the park and then posting them on Facebook or somewhere else. And now from these Twit pictures or Facebook pictures that mom takes the kids to the park every day at 4 p.m. You could kind of track where she goes. You can kind of track how she does her business, where she stops for coffee. If someone wanted to abduct your children and use them against you, you make it easier for them by posting pictures online that have GPS embedded data. I can now locate you, I can stalk you, I can harm your family because of that data. So I tell people, yeah, sure, when we talk about pen testing, usually we're not talking life and death matters. But some of this stuff has life and death protocols built into it, and you need to be aware of that. Again, critical thinking skills to know what pictures don't you care about. Like you said, someone comes and steals a bell pepper, who cares? But if it was of your kids, I'd be a lot more leery of that.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I don't even want to think about that. Wow, that's... to bring it back a little bit into the more of the structural aspects, I guess, you had a section on the flow of communication, and you dedicated a pretty big section to that. Why? What do you feel the importance of understanding that was?
Talking just about social engineering at this point, I think that part of the... Now, let me back up here for a second. So one of the common questions I get asked by people who are not natural social engineers, and I would include myself in that because I wasn't really born with these skills. I had to teach myself and learn them and continually learn them. Someone like Kevin Mitnick, who's a natural, the guy just has this built-in, switch that's turn on SE, So, he may not need to learn these skills, whereas someone like me, I learn these skills. So understanding communication flow, how people take in information, receive information, and how you deliver it, to me is very important to understand how social engineers work. But also as a pen tester, as a social engineering pen tester, it's important for me to understand that because not everybody's the same type of person. Right? If we talk just about, let's say, the DISC assessment, which is similar to Myers-Briggs, but a little more accurate and a little more easily used, determining if someone's like a DI, S, or C personality type enables me to quickly know how to adjust my communication style to speak to you on a more effective manner that will allow you to listen to me better, hear what I'm saying better, and feel more compliant with my wishes. So devoting a whole section to communication styles and communication methods is really important for the social engineer to understand and to really grasp how people take and receive and give information.
To give a comical example of that, I used to use kind of, I guess, a pickup line, you'd call it, where I would walk up and look down at a girl's shoes and say, "Oh, nice shoes." Follow it up with, "My grandmother has a pair just like that." And most of the time I got big laughs out of it and everything and could start up a conversation. Once I got hysterical crying, and had I actually been paying attention before walking up, I would have noticed that the girl was obviously distraught about something. And it turned out her grandmother had just passed away the day before or something. And of course I felt like a giant ass. But
yes, that's as an example of exactly what I'm talking about. Noticing people's nonverbal body language, noticing their communication styles, noticing, like, again, we're talking, let's say, maybe the corporate environment. I'm going to walk up to the secretary. What things are on her desk? Does she have tons of pictures of kids or grandkids, of her pets? That may mean she's a very outgoing, very proud person of her family. Does she have like the award her kid got for best football, or the report that they wrote, something like that? Noticing all these things can tell you a lot about the type of person you're about to interact with, and then quickly adjusting your communication style. So I tend to be a very forward, direct, and blunt communication style. That will work very well with people who like to be short, quick, who are very direct, but it works terrible with people who are very people-orientated or task-orientated. So if you're task-orientated, you want me to go like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's the steps. If you're people-orientated, you want me to be flowery and a little more complimentary before I talk. So if I come in and just, bam, I'm direct, here I am. If you're a people-orientated person, I have just turned you off. And I probably blew the chances I have at making you more compliant with my wishes. So I have to think about those things beforehand. Understanding how to read those communication styles and alter for them, very important for a social engineer.
Yeah. And you mentioned elicitation, and I think that was actually the first topic in your framework. What is elicitation?
So elicitation is the ability to get information from people without asking questions. And I love elicitation because, and it's interesting because I think it's the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, or maybe it's the NSA. One of the government websites has an actual brochure that they have for their agents on elicitation and the dangers of it, how it's used by nation states and enemies of our nation state in order to obtain information on projects or things that are going on. Because elicitation is basically what social engineers do: build a relationship, build rapport, make you feel happy that you get to know this person, and then getting information from you without ever really asking. And not walking up and saying, "What's your password?" But building that rapport and then having a pretext that does it. I saw this with my partner once, Robin Dreek, my partner who does the training course with me, my social engineering training course. He works with the FBI. He's the head of the behavioral analysis program, and he has this great little method. So we go into this restaurant, we're eating dinner, we're talking about just this topic, and he's like, "Watch this. I'll show you how this one topic works." The waitress comes up and he says to the waitress, he goes, "My buddy and I here are talking about this article we read, and it says 84% of the people use a form of their birth date as their password." He goes, and he says about himself, offering this information. He goes, "When I read that, I was shocked because I actually do use my birth date as my password." And then he looks at me, and I took the cue, and I'm like, "Well, actually, I use a combination of mine and my wife's birthday as my password." And then he looks at her with his palm up, kind of eyebrows raised, and she goes, "Oh, no, I would never do that. I actually use name of my daughter's favorite toy as a password. It's like Bam Bam." And then I added her year of birth date on it, which is 04. And bam, just in a conversation, again, not having to ask the question, but by offering up details, she gave us the passwords for her accounts, her bank account, what we were talking about. Just not thinking, amazing that this works right there, bam, in a restaurant, right in front of your eyes, how quickly and easily it is. People don't believe it. And then, during our class, we tell them how to obtain this information, how to work this. And then they go out and they try these things. And they're amazed at how many people will just offer up things like their birthdays, personal information about where they live, their family, their kids, all this kind of stuff, just because you're there and you're willing to listen and you know how to communicate with them properly.
So does NLP play a big role in that at all, or?
This might get me hated by some of your listeners or not. I have some issues with NLP in its present state. So the way NLP started in the 70s, and I wrote about this in my book, or maybe it was the 60s, with Bandler and Grinder, was as a therapeutic method.
Right.
And it was really an intelligent, something that had a lot of foresight. Getting, not just walking in and giving people drugs, but by letting them talk about their problems and altering your vocal tone, your body language, your words that you use to make the person feel more comfortable so they open up to you. It was genius. But what's happened over the recent years is people have turned NLP into something goofy. You got these guys that will tap you on the shoulder and say, this blue car is white, right? This blue car is white, right? This blue car is white, right? And all of a sudden the victim or the target believes that the blue car is white. And it makes most skeptical people go, yeah, okay, that's ridiculous and stupid. It proves that there's no scientific backing behind it, and it's ruined the good name that NLP had in the beginning stages of its life. So I have a hard time supporting what people think of NLP because of what's happened to it. But I say that the principles that started NLP, which basically we call influence now, changing your vocal tone, changing your body language, changing your facial expressions, using the different types of words that are power words, or that words that can infuse someone with empathy or things like that. All of those aspects of it, I think that it does play a big part in social engineering. But I commonly now use more the term influence than I do NLP because of what's happened in the last couple of years with NLP.
That makes sense. Yeah, it has been. People have done some really strange things with it. I think when I first heard about it, I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I read a little bit about it, but in getting into it, I was like, no thanks. This is too weird for me.
Yeah, the problem is with us, with social engineering, is we like to take everything back to the science. When I go to microexpressions, we talk about Paul Ekman's work and other people who've studied it for decades. When we talk about influence, you go to Cialdini. When you talk about manipulation, you look at some documents from the DOD or the NSA. You look at all these things that go back to the scientific principles of why these things work. And when you get to modern day NLP, there is no scientific evidence. So you can't, it's all mysticism. And that doesn't really bode well when you're trying to say, as an educator, here's how these things work. So I focus on things that have scientific backing, and influence does. We can prove psychologically why influence works. And we can prove that changing your vocal tone, changing your body language can make someone more empathetic or compliant.
Mm-hmm.
So doing those kinds of things, that works for me. But the modern day NLP, unfortunately, just doesn't seem to swing too well.
Yeah, it got turned into parlor tricks. And I think definitely it got goofy. So in a similar vein, maybe I'm not saying that quite right, but okay, so what is human buffer overflow?
So this is interesting. When we started our research, this is like 3 years ago. We started reading into. Okay, so if you take like a buffer overflow from a software program, so you have a buffer. This is a piece of the program that's supposed to hold X amount of memory, and if there's a flaw in the code, then if you put in more than it can hold, sometimes what will happen is that information will spill out into other parts of the program. And when it spills out, you can then give it pieces of commands or codes to say, go and do this. And sometimes, of course, with buffer overflows, when they're malicious, the go do this part will be, give me a shell or give me access to this person's computer, through this port or through this tunnel. So we said, okay, can we apply those same principles to the human beings? So with human beings, we have only a certain amount of memory that we can operate at one time. Like if I was talking to you and trying to write a letter right now, obviously I would not be able to do two things at the same time. Both of you would either get 50% or one of you would get 100%, the other would get 0. That you can't really do two things good at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
The human buffer overflow concept is using things like influence principles, changing your vocal tone, using words that will influence a person. So let's say I realize you're a visual type of person. I use words like, can you see what I mean? How does this look to you? I change my vocal tone to be more soft and calm. I slow down a little bit. That way it's a little easier for me to listen to, but not slow down so much that I make you sleepy or bored. And then I begin to input different statements, whatever my target goal is. I think in the book I use salespeople as an example. They'll say things like, so when you buy a product like this from someone like me, what kind of features are important to you? And in that statement, there's some really loaded information. When you buy a product like this, so buy a product like this from someone like me, so from me,
mm-hmm.
What kind of features are important to you? Now, what you hear is, tell me what's important to you. What features are important to you? What your subconscious hears is, when you buy this product from me. And it's a way to kind of plant. Now, it doesn't mean that someone's going to, like a zombie, put their arms out, follow you to the kitchen and write a check and you get all the sales you want. What it does is it creates a feeling of compliance within the target. It makes them easier to comply if their initial desire was to go that direction. So if your desire in your brain is to go left, I'm probably not going to convince you to go right. But if you were unsure, maybe left, maybe right, I'm not really sure, and I were to use these kind of principles, I can probably create the environment so you want to go left.
So most of it is a nudge.
A nudge. There is no, and this is where we have the argument with NLPers. I could say is there and scientific proof now. Unless someone is, and this goes back to cold reading too, another great topic.
Mm-hmm.
There really is no way to make someone do something they have a dead set mindset against doing without manipulating them. And that's not what NLP or those other things are about. So influence is about creating an environment that makes it easy for someone to do the wrong thing, right? So another great example is, I want to tailgate into a company. Well, if I notice that everyone in your company is wearing khakis and a button-up shirt, and I come with jeans and a t-shirt and a big old chain wallet, the guy who's watching the door is going to see me, and it's going to bring him out of alpha mode. He's going to now recognize me, and he's going to be like, whoa, who the heck is this? And it makes it harder for him to comply, even if I'm acting the part. Whereas if I have khakis and a button-up shirt, and I have a same kind of body language as everybody else, and I'm walking into the company the same as everybody else, then it's very feasible that when we're entering the company together, that his brain will be able to say, this guy belongs, he does not get called out of alpha mode, and it's easier for him to comply with something he knows he shouldn't do.
That's some pretty neat stuff.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are probably listening to this and thinking, God, this guy's just arming a bunch of scoundrels with more information. But I get the sincere sense that that's not why you wrote this book. Can you tell us a little bit about where the positive applications of understanding this information?
Yeah, actually, I love that question that you asked, because in the beginning, when I first wrote the book, that was a concern for mine. And literally one of my first interviews on the book, the reporter asked me that question. Aren't you afraid that criminals are going to go get this book and then be armed for doing bad? And just this response came out naturally, and it was something I stuck with for the last couple years. And it's the criminals are not going to Barnes and Nobles and looking for the how to be a criminal section. They already know this stuff.
Yeah,
they already knew how to do this. This is why it's working. The reason why we're failing as security people, or as we're failing as corporations, or we're failing as individuals, is because we don't know. We've had the ostrich syndrome. Put our head in the sand and ignore it. Maybe it will go away. And because we're not educated and aware of the methods that the bad guys are using, we can't possibly protect against it. So we need people that are willing. People like, Frank Abagnale, right? That guy from the Catch Me If You Can.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if anyone's not read that book or seen that movie, they can look up Frank Abagnale. He was able to fly for free and steal millions of dollars worth of money from airlines posing as an employee all around the world for years. When he got arrested, spent his time in jail, and came out, now he became a consultant. We need people like that who could teach us, this is how I got away with it. I got away with it because this is the flaws in the system. And if you don't fix these flaws, there's going to be 100 other guys that do the same thing. And if we don't have people that are willing to stand up and say, here's exactly how the bad guys are social engineering us, here's how they're influencing us, here's how they're attacking us, then the bad guys are going to continue to do their thing. But us, the consumer, the employee, the corporation, we're going to be oblivious to it, and we're going to continue to be under attack.
Such good words on the topic. And, and I think in a lot of ways, perhaps human beings evolve personally and as a society. Would you say that social engineering itself also, much like a game of Red Queen, also is constantly evolving?
Always. Yeah, I think the basis of social engineering has been the same since the beginning of human history. You can read accounts as far back as you want to go, and you could see influence and persuasion being used throughout history in the same exact manner. But what does change is the tools that are now available to the malicious hackers, and also the amount of people using it. You go back to the 70s and you can look through and you can see just handfuls of cases where good scams or social engineers were used. Now you come up into this time and you're seeing every hacktivist group under the sun is using social engineering all the time. Why? What's happening? People are getting more bold. They're getting more used to using these type of skills. They're trying things with the availability of VoIP lines and phone spoofing and SMS spoofing and email spamming and things like that. We're able to try these things with very little repercussions. In the 70s, if you wanted to try social engineering and see if you were good at it in a malicious way, you had to actually go try to do something illegal and get the chance of being caught and arrested. Mm-hmm. Now, kids can sit in their living room, pull up a spoof card and spoof a phone number and make a couple phone calls and see how good they are at these skills. So the availability for technology to allow people to try it and get good at it is much more prevalent today than it was before. So although the principles are the same, the tools are getting much more complicated.
Oh, definitely. I know in the marketing world, we use A/B testing for websites a lot to try out different bits of copy to see, in sales letters and things like that, what works the best. And it is amazing. I mean, change one word and it can change the entire impact of a whole letter or a whole online presentation. And the detail with which the tools provide is just staggering. I mean, that's just one example. There's tons of them out there.
Yeah, that is so true. I mean, I don't really propose myself as a marketing guru, but I have people I work with that help us with that from our business end. Mm-hmm. And it is amazing to think sometimes you can change one word or a little sentence on a website and you can watch your SEO go through the roof.
Oh, yeah.
You can watch your marketing letter get more hits because you changed one or two simple things. So, just those things, forget about social engineering for a second, just on human influence, those things prove that it's easy to figure out the equations on how someone will react better, react more intensely to words or to written words, spoken words, just by small changes.
Yeah, totally amazing. And you mentioned y'all's business. You do training in this topic. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this is kind of a funny part of the story is the way the framework actually began was I was working with a group that does security training, and I wanted to write a social engineering course. And it was something that I really wanted to do for a while. And the guy I was working with, he said, well, to do that, you need to have a good piece of research that you can refer to. So I started doing research online. And what I found was when you typed in social engineering, this was maybe about 3.5 years ago, maybe a little more, you found YouTube videos on how to get free hamburgers from McDonald's, how to get free pizza, how to pick up chicks. But there wasn't a lot to do with security stuff. And I said, this is kind of disturbing. Like, we should write a framework. Actually, I didn't say that. I said somebody should write a framework that defines what social engineering is. And the guy I was working with, he said, yeah, that's right. You're going to do it. And I'm like, I'm going to do it. It's like, I'm not the professional at this. And he's like, well, you're going to do this. So we started writing it. And I went to the community, asked people who wanted to help. We had a lot of help. We got the framework set up. And 6 months later, we launched the website. I thought, this is going to be a good resource for a couple hundred people. It'll be something that, some people use. And it blew up. This wasn't like some genius marketing plan. It blew up overnight. We were getting tens of thousands of hits on the site. And that's when I got approached by Kevin Mitnick's publisher, which was Wiley at the time, to write a book on the framework, what social engineering is and how anyone can learn it. So after I wrote the book, I said, now I'm going to finish writing my course. So my podcast, we had interviewed multiple people. And one of the people we interviewed was Robin Dreek, who was the director of the behavioral analysis program for the FBI. And I had begun to speak with him about a book he was writing on building rapport. And it just was amazing to think about the things I wanted to do in my training program were the exact methods that the FBI was using to train their recruits when it came to this kind of stuff. And I said, well, isn't that funny? I thought this was unique, and, he thought his stuff was unique. So we started to collaborate on this. And I think it was a year later, the course was born. We had set one up over in Seattle. So the hard part for us was creating a course that wasn't just lectures, because social engineering is such soft skills. It's human skills. You don't want 5 days of people sitting in a room listening to you yap. Yeah. So we came up with ways to make it very interactive. A lot of video examples during the course. We have worksheets of things that we fill out. Our first day, we actually do psych profiles on each individual person. They do that themselves. So you learn about what kind of a person you are. That helps you determine how you communicate. And then each night, there's homework. We give homework to each group, team, and they have to go out and obtain information from people in the public. And of course, innocuous information, nothing that would get them in trouble. And usually what happens the first night, everyone's like, no way, it's not going to work. We hate you. And by day 5, they're amazed at how much easier it has gotten and how much information they're getting. So we take them through that, and then we developed a certification for our social engineering course too. So right now it's focused on penetration testers, although we've had everybody from psychologists to government people to pen testers take the course. We're thinking of altering it a tad bit for different groups to have maybe not so much geared towards pen testing for every group, and then see how that works down the road. But right now it seems to be going quite good.
Well, that's cool. So, and if somebody's interested in this, what is the best way for them to get information on that and get in touch with you?
So the business side of our site is social-engineer.com. And on there is information about the book and the course and the security awareness and pen testing and other things like that. They can get information there, or they can email me anytime. It's chris@social-engineer.com, and we'll be more than happy to give out information all they want about these type of things.
Cool. And social-engineer.org is more of a blog, or?
Yeah, so the .org is where we host our podcast, our monthly newsletter that goes out. The framework is there. The blog is there, which we're blogging about things that are happening in the news involving social engineering. So all the free informational resources that are about social engineering live on the .org. Mm-hmm. And then the business side is on the .com.
Well, thank you so much, Christopher. This has definitely been one of the most enlightening interviews I've ever done.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
And again, Christopher, am I going to pronounce this wrong again? Hadnagy?
Hadnagy is fine, either one. But Hadnagy is the proper pronunciation, at least for America.
Hadnagy is the author and lead developer of social-engineer.org, part of a podcast by the same name, and the author of Social Engineering, The Art of Human Hacking, a book I cannot recommend enough. Thank you again, Christopher.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
And with that, we wrap up episode 82. Thank you for joining us. Help us bring you better information about preparedness. If you have an author, blogger, podcaster, video blogger, or any other person you'd like to hear on the show, we'd love to have them on. Contact the person you'd like to hear on the show and tell them about In the Rabbit Hole Urban Survival Podcast. Tell them to visit intherabbithole.com/guest. Don't wait. Do it today, and let's grow the show together. Do you have something to say about survival and preparedness? In the Rabbit Hole is looking for people that are passionate about all topics of survival to become blog contributors. Don't sit on the sidelines. Share your knowledge with others today. Contact us through the feedback form on the site and let us know you'd be interested in becoming an In the Rabbit Hole contributor. Get weekly updates about articles, episodes, and special In the Rabbit Hole announcements every Saturday morning by signing up for the newsletter through the website, intherabbithole.com. From the Lone Star State, till next time, stay safe and sound.